Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're undertaking a mission that is fundamental to understanding the entire body. We're going right to the source.
We are. We're tackling the cellular basis of anatomy itself.
Yeah, we're deep diving into a critical chapter from Gray's Anatomy on tissue integration, and we're going to try and distill all the high-yield facts you really need to know.
And this is, the essential starting point. We have to understand how the human body moved beyond just a collection of single cells to become this system of specialized multicellular communities.
It's incredible when you think about it.
It is. You have over 200 distinct cell types in your body. And the most amazing part is that every single one of them shares the exact same genome.
So the difference between a nerve cell and a kidney cell isn't the genetic blueprint, it's the execution.
Exactly. It's all about these sophisticated, coordinated patterns of gene expression. That's what lets cells specialize and then organize into the communities we call tissues.
Okay, so the chapter lays out the famous Big Four categories.
Precisely. Based on their structure and their main job. First up, you've got the epithelia.
Those are the continuous sheets of cells, the barriers.
Right. Then second, you have the connective or supporting tissues. And here, the cells are more dispersed within a huge volume of what we call the extracellular matrix, or ECM.
And that ECM is what dictates the physical properties.
It's everything. Then third is muscle tissue, built for contraction.
And fourth, nervous tissue for conducting signals.
And you can actually see this specialization right down to the molecular level. It's like a cellular ID tag.
How so?
Each of these four groups is defined by the specific intermediate filament proteins they express inside.
That's a fantastic nugget for recall. So epithelial cells, for instance, what's their tag?
Theirs is keratins.
Okay. And what about the others?
Connective tissues use vimentins. Muscle tissue has desmins. And nervous tissue expresses things like neurofilament proteins. These proteins are the internal scaffolding, and their identity is basically molecular proof that these four categories are truly distinct.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We're focusing today on the first two, epithelia and the general connective tissues. Let's start with epithelia, the body's selective barrier.
They're the ultimate gatekeepers. They are these continuous layers covering surfaces or lining cavities, and their jobs are, well, they're really diverse.
So beyond just being a barrier.
Oh, yeah. They provide protection from dehydration or mechanical stress. They carry out synthesis and secretion, and they can even be sensory surfaces.
And structurally, their defining feature is that cohesion, right? You have to visualize cells packed so tightly together.
So tightly that the extracellular space is almost non-existent. It's basically limited to the basal lamina they all rest on.
And that tight connection is enforced by specialized junctions.
It's vital. If you were to scan down from the free or apical surface, the first thing you'd hit is the tight junctional zone.
Including junctions.
Exactly. They literally seal the space between cells. So nothing can leak through. Everything has to pass through the cell itself.
And what's below those seals?
You find the adherent junctional zone, and then these discrete spot weld-like attachments called desmosomes. They provide just incredible mechanical strength.
But that creates a puzzle. If they're so tightly bound, how do they get nutrients? Because epithelia are completely avascular.
That's the critical limitation. No blood vessels of their own.
So how does a sheet of living, active cells survive without its own blood supply?
They rely entirely on diffusion. They get all their oxygen and nutrients from capillaries in the neighboring connective tissue just underneath them.
And that's why there's a limit to how thick they can be.
It's the anatomical reason. The diffusion distance would just become too great to sustain the cells at the top.
So the first classification is just layering, simple or stratified.
Right. A simple or unilaminar epithelium is just a single layer of cells on the basal lamina. Stratified or multilaminar means it's more than one cell thick.
Let's stick with the simple epithelia for a moment, because here, cell shape tells you everything about its metabolic activity.
It's a perfect correlation. A flat, thin cell, what we call simple squamous, has very little cytoplasm, which means low metabolic activity. Its goal is speed.
But a taller cell, like a cuboidal or columnar one,
Is packed with organelles like mitochondria. That signifies high activity, usually focused on absorption or secretion.
So if we visualize simple squamous epithelium, we're picturing flattened polygonal cells, almost like microscopic paving stones.
That's a great way to think of it. They're so thin, sometimes less than a tenth of a micrometer thick, that the nucleus just bulges out. This is all for rapid diffusion of gases and water.
Like in the lung alveoli.
Exactly, or the renal corpuscles. Perfect examples.
Okay, so moving from the flat tiles to the more structured rows, cuboidal and columnar, but they get really advanced when they develop surface specializations.
The microvilli are a huge one. They're these tiny finger-like projections that just dramatically increase the surface area for absorption.
Like the striated border in the small intestine.
Yes. And we should probably clear up a classic point of confusion here.
Yeah.
The stereocilia.
Right. The name is misleading.
Very. They look like really long cilia, especially in the epididymis, but they're actually just exceptionally long microvilli. They don't move. They are not true cilia.
And where do we find true cilia?
You find those in places like the ciliated columnar epithelium lining most of our respiratory tract.
Which brings us to one of the body's most critical self-cleaning systems.
The mucociliary rejection current. It's a nonstop clearance system. Glands secrete a sticky layer of mucus.
And the cilia beat in sync.
Like thousands of tiny oars, all sweeping that mucus, along with any trapped dust and debris up towards the pharynx to be dealt with.
Now, let's tackle that visualization paradox.
Yeah.
Pseudostratified epithelium. It looks stratified, but it's not.
It's an optical illusion in cross-section because the nuclei are scattered at different levels. But the critical defining fact is this. All of the cells, even the small basal ones, are still in contact with the basal lamina.
So because every cell touches the foundation, it's defined as simple.
That's the rule. And that ciliated respiratory lining we just mentioned, that's typically pseudostratified.
Okay, speaking of complex layering, let's shift to the multilaminar epithelia and the organs they give rise to, the glands. Multi-layered tissues or the body's armor.
Absolutely. They're found where there's serious mechanical damage skin, esophagus. New cells are always being made in the basal layer, migrating up, and then eventually being shed from the surface. It's continuous maintenance.
And we have two major forms, keratinized and non-keratinized. What's the key difference in their function?
Keratinized tissue is built to be tough and water-resistant. Think of the epidermis, your skin. Its surface cells are a nucleate. They're dead squames packed with hard keratin.
A tough, dry barrier.
Right. Whereas non-keratinized tissues, like in the esophagus, retain their nuclei until they're shed. They line wet surfaces and are protected from drying out.
And then there's the masterpiece of the urinary lining, the urothelium.
Or transitional epithelium. Its integrity is just astonishing. When the bladder is empty, it looks thick, maybe 4 to 6 cells deep, with these big, dome-shaped surface cells.
But when it stretches,
It flattens dramatically, down to only 2 or 3 cells thick, without breaking. This is possible because of specialized, stiff plasma membrane plaques on their surface that can unfold as needed.
before we classify glands, we have to mention their little helpers, the myoepithelial cells.
Yes, the contractile assistants. They are these star-shaped cells with actin and myosin, and they sit between the basal lamina and the secretory cells of a gland.
So they squeeze the gland.
They do. When stimulated, they contract and help push the initial secretion out into the ducts. Very important in salivary and mammary glands.
So onto the glands themselves, we classify them based on where their product goes.
It's pretty straightforward. Exocrine glands have ducts and secrete onto a surface like sweat or saliva.
Endocrine glands are ductless.
Right, they secrete hormones directly into the circulation, the thyroid, the pituitary, and then you have paracrine cells, which just act locally on their immediate neighbors.
Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Visualizing how these glands mechanically release their products. Let's start with the most common method.
That would be merocrine secretion. It's clean and efficient. The secretion is packaged in vesicles, and the cell releases the contents via exocytosis. The cell itself stays completely intact.
Like milk protein.
Milk protein is a perfect example.
Okay, if that's the standard, what's the method that involves partial cell loss?
That would be apocrine secretion. Here, the cell actually pinches off a piece of its apical cytoplasm along with the secretory product.
So the cell is damaged in the process.
A little bit, yes. The classic example is the secretion of milk fat from the mammary glands.
And finally, the most extreme method, where the cell sacrifices itself entirely.
Holocrine secretion. Hollow meaning whole. The entire cell fills with product, and then the whole thing just disintegrates to release it.
Like the sebaceous glands in our skin.
Exactly. That's how we get sebum. It's the remains of those cells. And all of this is, of course, intensely regulated by the nervous and endocrine systems, often with complex feedback loops.
Let's move to the foundation of all of this. The basement membrane, and specifically the basal lamina. It's so much more than just scaffolding.
Oh, it's definitely not a passive layer. Under an electron microscope, you see it's really 2 layers. Closest to the cells is the basal lamina itself. made of laminin and type 5e collagen. The epithelium makes that part.
And underneath that?
Is the reticular lamina, which connects everything to the underlying connective tissue.
So beyond just anchoring, what are its critical jobs?
It's a vital, selectively permeable barrier. It has fixed negative charges, so it acts as an anionic filter, repelling negatively charged molecules.
Which is crucial in the kidney.
In the glomerular filter, it's everything. It also guides migrating cells and growing nerve processes during repair and development.
And when it fails, disease follows.
Absolutely. You see it thicken in conditions like diabetes, and in autoimmune diseases like Goodpasture syndrome, the body directly attacks the type IV collagen in the basal lamina. It can be catastrophic.
Now we make the jump to our second major tissue type, connective and supporting tissues. And the key difference is it's mostly extracellular matrix, the ECM.
Exactly. The cells are more spread out, and the matrix itself, the fibers and the ground substance, is what determines the tissue's physical properties.
So let's meet the resident cells, starting with the builders.
The fibroblasts. They're the most numerous, and they synthesize pretty much all the ECM components. When they're active, say during wound repair, they're packed with rough endoplasmic reticulum.
And their specialized cousins, the myofibroblasts.
Those are critical for wound contraction. They contain actin and myosin, so they can literally pull the edges of a wound together. Pathologically, they're involved in fibrosis and scarring.
Okay, then we have the energy storage cells, adipocytes. We need to distinguish between the two types of fat.
Right. We have white fat, which is unilocular, meaning one giant lipid droplet for long-term energy storage. It pushes the nucleus right to the edge of the cell.
And then there's brown fat.
Brown fat is multilocular, lots of small fat droplets, and it's packed with mitochondria. It's not for storage. Its job is to generate heat.
Thanks to a special protein, right?
Yes, uncoupling protein 1, or UCP1. It short-circuits the energy production pathway, releasing energy directly as heat instead of making ATP. It's crucial for thermogenesis, especially in infants.
And besides these residents, connective tissue is the highway for the body's migrant defense cells.
You're talking about cells coming in from the circulation. You've got macrophages for cleanup, lymphocytes for immunity, B cells and T cells, and mast cells.
Which are crucial for inflammation.
Yes, they release histamine and heparin and are usually found near blood vessels ready to sound the alarm.
Okay, let's get back to the matrix, to its mechanical function. What gives connective tissue its incredible tensile strength?
Collagen. By weight, it's the most abundant protein in the body. Its job is to resist being pulled apart. Type I is the main one, in bone, tendon, dermis.
And it has that distinct banding pattern.
That's right, a repeating 65 nanometer pattern you can see with an electron microscope, which comes from the precise staggered alignment of the molecules.
So if collagen resists pulling, what gives tissue the ability to stretch and snap back?
That would be elastin. It's highly cross-linked and provides almost perfect recoil. You find it in places that need to be flexible, like big artery walls.
And defects there lead to things like Marfan syndrome.
Precisely. That's caused by a defect in fibrillin, a protein associated with elastin.
Finally, the amorphous stuff in between, the ground substance, what's its job?
It resists compression. It's made of these highly hydrated polymers that bind massive amounts of water, forming a stiff, viscous gel. Think of it as the shock absorber and lubricant in your joints.
Okay, let's quickly classify the connective tissues then. It's based on how orderly the fibers are.
Right. They fall into irregular and regular. Irregular tissues have fibers running in all directions to resist stress from multiple angles.
Like the dermis of the skin.
The dermis, organ capsules. Loose, irregular, or areolar tissue is the more generalized filler stuff under the skin.
And regular connective tissues.
The fibers here are highly oriented, all running in parallel, aligned perfectly with the direction of stress. Tendons and ligaments are the classic examples, built to transmit force in one direction.
Yeah, it's a great overview, so let's bring it all together.
Okay, to recap the most vital points. First, remember the hierarchy of epithelial classification, simple for diffusion and secretion, stratified for protection.
Right.
Second, really visualize the differences in the three secretion modes. Merocrine is clean exocytosis, apocrine is pinching off a piece of the cell, and holocrine is total cell disintegration.
Got it. And the third point.
Connect the ECM components to their mechanical roles. Collagen resists tension, ground substance resists compression, and elastin provides recoil.
So what does this all mean? It means the body structure is a story of continuous specialization, but also surprising resilience.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting.
Because tissues aren't always static. They can change, The chapter brings up this phenomenon called metaplasia.
It's a kind of transdifferentiation, often a protective measure gone wrong. Think about the respiratory epithelium in a smoker. It's constantly being damaged.
So it changes.
It can change from that delicate, ciliated pseudostratified tissue to a much tougher but non-functional stratified squamous tissue. It survives, but it can't clear mucus anymore.
And it can happen the other way, too.
It can. In response to chronic acid reflux, the stratified squamous lining of the esophagus can be replaced by a mucus-secreting columnar lining, a condition called Barrett's esophagus.
So metaplasia shows us that tissue structure isn't a fixed blueprint. It's a dynamic adaptation to its environment. The body is constantly compromising, trying to find a way to survive.
Exactly, trading optimal function for immediate survival.
A fascinating and foundational concept. Thank you for engaging with this deep dive into the anatomy of tissue integration.